Once again, it's Gabe Morales of Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians. Today, we have a very special guest. He is very well respected in his field. We have Jonathan Meyer. He is a elected Lewis County prosecuting attorney. He's on his fourth term. Lewis County is located in Washington State. I'll let him explain a little bit about where that's at and a little bit more about that county. But he is the past president of the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. He is a court recognized expert, has heard many high profile cases, and is considered an expert in his field. Like I said, he also was a reserve police officer in the city of Tenino for 10 years. Good morning, sir.
Morning, how
How
are
are you?
you? I'm
Oh,
good, and you?
okay. I guess good afternoon. Yeah, I guess it's good afternoon. I still feel like it's morning here in Hawaii, but I know it's afternoon over there in Washington State. Very good. I'm doing good. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah,
coming on the show.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Jonathan, where are you born and raised?
So I was actually born in the state of Illinois, just north of the Missouri-Illinois border. And then when I was in the first grade, I moved up to just outside of Chicago. And then in the eighth grade, my family moved to Washington. So we just followed my dad as his career kind of changed. And I actually did the majority of my growing up in Aberdeen, Washington, out on the coast.
Aberdeen. Know that very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that. Love that. The beach is a little bit colder over there on the coast of Washington coast in Hawaii, but it's still nice.
Yeah, my parents said we were going to move by the ocean, so I had Hawaii and Mexico in my mind, and they moved me out, and I'm like, "What is this? Gray and wet and cold and windy." But it was a great place to grow up. It really was.
All right, all right. And so then, what did you do after high school?
Basically, college. I got married at 19, so my wife and I have been married just over 34 years now, and it was one of those that we were super young, and fortunately, she was very patient. And so I finished my 2 year degree, then I went and got my 4 year degree, and then went straight into law school from that. So we got married in 91. I graduated law school in 98.
All right, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And so, Jonathan, how did you get into the criminal justice field?
So being a lawyer is something that I always kind of knew in the back of my mind that I wanted to do. I don't know if it was too much Perry Mason as a kid or, my favorite book was To Kill a Mockingbird. So I always just kind of had that idea and I always enjoyed the argument part of it. And so it's just something that I always kind of wanted to do. I wasn't straight out of high school. I wasn't prepared to do the work that it took to become an attorney, but eventually I got serious about my studies and knew that's where I wanted to go. My original intention was to be a prosecutor. It took a different route than I anticipated.
Interesting, interesting. And so then you worked for several different law firms, I understand, and court jurisdictions. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how that all
Sure.
played out?
So, like I said, I wanted to be a prosecutor when I first started at law school. So between my first and second year of law school, I was actually a judicial intern for Grays Harbor Superior Court, which is where I grew up in that county. And, I got some great exposure there. I got to work on the county's first three strikes case. And, I really learned a lot at the feet of those judges and some of those prosecutors and defense attorneys. And I had cemented that I definitely wanted to be a prosecutor. And I had an internship lined up for the next summer with the Grays Harbor County Prosecutor's Office. But unfortunately, the funding for that fell through. And so I didn't have a job lined up. So I actually went to work for a defense attorney that I had met that summer. And it was just meant to be a temporary job. And then, 14 years later, I was still there. And eventually I became an intern, then an associate, and then a partner in that firm. And I was with that firm until I left to become prosecutor.
Excellent, excellent. And can you tell us a little bit more about Lewis County? Can you tell us a little bit more about the dynamics there, the makeup of the county, and some of the local issues?
Sure. So the easiest way to think of Lewis County is we're halfway between Seattle and Portland. So we have I-5, which is the major thoroughfare for the state that runs right through the county. And then we have Highway 12, which runs to Eastern Washington. So we tend to see a lot of trafficking of drugs and stuff in this area because we do have those major routes that come through here. We're about 85,000 people and very large geographically. But once you get outside of the Centralia Chehalis area, which are the two main cities here, it becomes very rural very quickly. And so geographically, we're the largest county in Western Washington, but we're considered a medium-sized county for the state.
I understand. I understand. And so, what are some of the things when you first started? What are some of the things you were dealing with back then? as far as the criminal justice system, the laws, crime trends, and what are some of the more recent issues that have come up?
So, we've always had a lot of drug issues in Lewis County and I guess Washington State in general. But in Lewis County, it's like I said, rural, a lot of working class folks. And then, when the logging industry kind of went south, when the coal industry kind of went south, there were a lot of people that were facing a lot of hard times. And so hard times leads to sometimes bad decisions. And so we saw an increase in drugs. We used to have a lot of meth labs, but those have kind of gone away simply because we had a lot because it was such a rural county. They were easy to hide, because the county could only cover so much geographically, and so they were difficult to detect. Washington then implemented where you had to show ID to get Sudafed, and so that really kind of put a dent in the manufacture aspect of it, and it just became so cheap to import it from Mexico, and so that's typically where the methamphetamine that we see here in the county goes or comes from is Mexico. So we still see that, and that's a great driver for a lot of crimes. I mean, if you look at the majority of your burglaries, your assaults, all of those are typically going to be drug related one way or the other. Things that they wouldn't normally do if they were clean and sober, all of a sudden don't seem like such a bad idea when they can get money for a fix. That's when all of a sudden breaking into a house, breaking into a business seems like a good idea. So a lot of our crime here is drug related. And that used to be the majority of what this office filed was drug cases for felony offenses. Well, back in 2021, the state Supreme Court decided that the current drug law was unconstitutional. And so they determined that drug convictions from 1971 or so up until that time were actually invalid convictions and that the current law was no longer constitutional. So there was a period of time where all drugs were legal in the state of Washington, regardless of age. And so we saw a big increase in possessory type stuff. We saw a big increase in overdose deaths. And it really took the legislature a while to warm up to the idea that they actually had to do something. And of course, once they did something, they made it a gross misdemeanor. It was a misdemeanor for a while, then it became a gross misdemeanor, but it never got back to the felony level. So right now, we still charge some drug cases, but not nearly as many as we used to, simply because it's such a low level offense that we're not seeing a lot of referrals from law enforcement. So that really kind of changed the dynamic of what we do. And we've also seen a major increase on mental health type cases. If we look now, we have a lot more drug-induced psychosis, a lot more diminished capacity defenses that come from drug abuse and years of drug abuse. And we have just an enormous amount of mental health cases that go through our court now, to the point of where we actually have a mental health sentencing alternative that we use. We have a mental health court program that we also use that we created here locally in an effort to try to get people the help that they need. Because while we want to be tough on crime, the best way to defeat crime is to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place. And so if we can get folks to quit using and get the help that they need, even if it's not a permanent fix, while they're clean and while they're getting the help, they're not committing crimes. And so we do have a better, safer community.
Got you. Well, as you know, Jonathan, I just did a series on California prisons, and my last episode was on the California Youth Authority. And of course, there's some differences between the juvenile and adult systems. Having gone there to Green Hill School there that you have there in your county, I'm very familiar with that facility and some of the gangs in there and some of the incidents that have happened there in past years, anyways. And so when we first talked, we had talked a little bit about maybe you covering some of the differences now in juvenile laws. I saw in, I believe it was King 5 News recently, where a kid got caught with a gun and he had, I believe it was a carjacking and been caught with a gun several other times. And they were saying that really it would take about 5 times for a kid to get caught with a weapon before he did any lockup time. Is that the same thing you're seeing down there, or is it different?
Yeah, so I mean, the juvenile offenses have really kind of skyrocketed. Several years ago, Washington decided that you can be in a juvenile facility up until the age of 25. So basically, now you have anywhere from 9 or 10-year-olds theoretically up to 25 in the same system. Now, for the long term, if you're serving a sentence of under 30 days, you're going to serve it at the local county facility. Anything over 30 days, you're going to go into the JRA, Juvenile Rehabilitation System. And there's two different facilities, Echo Glen, which is below 16, and then there's Green Hill, which is 16 and above. The problem that we have is that you have 16-year-olds with 25-year-olds, and that's not a good mix. You know, you have 25-year-olds that are much more sophisticated, much more advanced for their age, and you have 16-year-olds who are still trying to figure out what life means. And, you know, we all agree that the brain develops at different ages, and males tend to go into their late 20s before their brain is fully developed. But at the same time, it's on a progressive scale. The older you get, the more developed you are. So having 16-year-olds and 25-year-olds together is not a good idea. So we've advocated, and finally the state has agreed. They're creating a new facility, and it just opened up for 18 to 25-year-olds. And so they're going to be housed at a different facility. They'll have different security levels, which is good. They need to separate those groups more, and I think that we'll see better results. But we do see a lot of crime coming out of Green Hill, a lot of violence, because that's where all the gang members go. And the problem is you have different gangs, different sects that interact there, and a lot of them are having fight on site rules. So one of the, I guess, offshoots of being a prosecutor is I got to talk to a lot of people that have been accused of crimes, and I got to talk to a lot of the intelligence officers that deal with these folks. And, you know, they have fight on site rules. So if you see someone from a rival gang, you have no choice. You have to fight. Recently, we learned that they're directing their members not to take their medications because that makes them weak and appear weak. So now you have a bunch of kids with anger control issues, impulse control issues that are now unmedicated. So that's going to create a violent situation as well. We saw a huge increase when they created JR to 25. We saw a huge increase in what we call prison riots. And that's two or more individuals fighting and disrupting the good order of the institution. Well, we charged a couple of hundred, within a span of like 3 or 4 years, we charged a couple of hundred kids with prison riots. A lot of them had more than one offense, but you know, we saw some very large scale fights. We saw dozens of kids involved in fights and created some really dangerous situations. Well, Olympia, which is our capital, the legislature decided that we were charging too many kids, and they didn't like to see that. And so they changed it. So now you can't have a prison riot offense inside a juvenile facility. So now these kids are able to fight without repercussion. You know, we might be able to charge them with like a simple assault, but if there's 10, 15 kids involved, there's really nothing that we can do.
Well, for the second straight day, legislators in Olympia spent the day talking about overhauling juvenile justice in our state. Now, Fox 13 has aired exclusive video of riots taking place inside of Green Hill. That's a local juvenile detention facility. But today's bill being discussed was focused on whether the charge of prison riot is appropriate when it comes to juveniles, and whether a 2021 change in law allowed for some unintended consequences. That's because riot has a pretty broad meaning here. As the law is currently written, it's any fight involving 3 or more people behind bars. And while Green Hill has made plenty of headlines on our airwaves for management issues, we also now know that nearly 100 charges were filed for prison riot in the past year in Lewis County alone, most of those linked to Green Hill. That's adding prison time to juvenile offenders. So a bill known as HB 1815 would get rid of the prison charge for use at juvenile facilities. The Lewis County prosecutor who prosecutes these cases was front and center for today's debate.
There has to be a tool for us to be able to combat that. To simply say we can't charge that conduct any longer, I think it would be a miscarriage of justice, and it would turn Green Hill into a fight club.
My son was struggling with the influence of gang violence. He was continuously targeted while being incarcerated at Green Hill until the day that he was charged for defending himself against 2 other youths in an environment that was significantly understaffed with the charge of prison riot.
Today's debate falls on the heels of Tuesday's debate over population and a plan to allow the state to transfer juveniles to adult facilities due to their population crisis that's been stressing their system. And there's another 4 bills on the Senate side still being discussed as well. The bills listed here on your screen range from the transfer of inmates to new diversion programs to get juveniles into other facilities.
And so we had some very good success when we were prosecuting those cases. And we actually saw a turn. We started to see that number go down. We started to see inmates stepping in to break up fights, to keep their brothers from getting in trouble. And that's exactly what we want to see. The goal of the JR program and the facilities is behavior modification, right? That's what we want to see. We want to see these kids come out. We want to see them behaving differently, and we want to see them making better choices on the outside. Well, they took away the incentive to do that. Now they can just fight and not have that big of a problem. So that really kind of cut us off at the knees as far as what we could do to help curb the violence in those facilities. You know, we're seeing a lot of controlled substance in those facilities as well. We're encouraging JRA to make several changes, which they have made. Before, you know, they would get letters in with, I call it soaker paper, where the paper's soaked in drugs and they would ingest those. We have people throwing footballs over the fence filled with drugs. We have people flying drones and dropping drugs that way. So, you know, it's taken up a lot of our local law enforcement time, and it's taken up a lot of the time of this office. But it's something that, you know, we care about the kids that are in there. I mean, they deserve to be in there. They've done bad things, but we don't want to see them harmed further. And so we take a very serious stance on crimes when we do see them. And we want to see what's best for them, and we want to see them get better and get the help that they need. And so it's important for us that we are aggressive when we address these things to hopefully we'll see a switch in their behavior.
What about staff assaults? Have you heard of any staff assaults there? I know in the California Youth Authority, there's even been some homicides and near homicides, serious injuries towards staff. Have you heard about that there?
Oh yes, so we routinely prosecute custodial assaults. So it's a simple assault, but if it's on a staff member, it becomes a felony. So it tends to be repeat offenders. So we have kids that have basically impulse control issues, and they're defiant towards authority anyway. And so when they're told to go to their room or something along those lines, they're not going to do it. And so they end up assaulting staff. We've had staff assaulted with broom handles. We had over at our local facility, inmate was able to get handcuffs off of an officer and beat her with the handcuffs. And it's again, something that we are seeing a rise. It just seems like in general, as a society, we're becoming more violent with, I guess, less forward thinking. You know, because I remember when I was a kid, I would get mad and I want to get in a fight with somebody, but then at the same time, I would think, you know, that's probably not the best idea for my future or for me as a person. And so you have those inner conversations. Now a lot of kids seem to not have those conversations and just act out before they even think about it. I think society, at least since I was a kid, has changed so much. You know, it used to be divorced parents was kind of the outlier. You didn't see that a whole lot. Now the 30, 40-year marriages like you and I have are the oddity. You know, you don't see that a lot. And so when you see the breakdown of the traditional family, I think you do see a breakdown because there's other obligations. You have one parent households and they're trying to put food on the table. And so they're not always able to be there for that supervision. And, you know, growing up, I didn't really have a choice. If I didn't toe the line and do what I was supposed to do, there was consequences. If it wasn't from my parents, it was from my teachers, it was from my coaches. So I really didn't have time to get into trouble because I was just always busy. And now we just see that kids have so much free time on their hands, so much access to bad influences through either, you know, what they see online, what they experience online. There's just so many different influences that even a two-parent household, you can't keep up with it all. And so when you see some of this stuff, you have to kind of wonder what led down this path. And, you know, but I think that's why we have different programs. And I think it's important that we have some type of intervention at each step along the way. So, you know, if it's their first offense, we'll have a program for them. If it's their second offense, we'll have a program for them, because hopefully everyone will realize I need to get off of this path that I'm on. And when they make that decision, we need to have something there for them. You know, like if you look at our drug court that we have for adult court, we're going to force the issue of sobriety and treatment. And we're hopeful that during that process where we're forcing them to be good and behave, that the switch will go on and they're like, oh yeah, I do like living like this. And I like this version of me better. Well, we have those types of programs for juveniles as well. So we want to see those programs take effect. And even if they're not successful in the program, we actually see a lower recidivism rate. I don't want people involved in the criminal justice system, but if they find themselves involved in the criminal justice system, I want to make sure they have an avenue to get out and be a better person.
It sounds like you're saying we need to improve on our system of rewards and punishments. That we're definitely failing a lot of these kids in a lot of ways, not just the schools, but the criminal justice system itself. And so that leads me into my next question. If you were a youngster right now, Jonathan, I know it's been a long time since we've been young. You mentioned that things have changed. What kind of advice would you have for a young person today to stay out of the criminal justice system?
One of the great things that this job has given me the opportunity to do is I coach. So I actually coach high school fast pitch. And so I still deal with kids on a regular basis. And one of the things I'm always telling them is look at the 5 people you hang around with. Hang around jackasses, you're a jackass too. Surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, they work harder than you, gonna force you to be better. If you hang around people that are in trouble, if you hang around people that are going to do bad things, you're going to end up doing bad things. Water seeks its own level. And so it's all about who you are hanging around with to a certain extent. You have to stay in school, you have to do the right thing. And what I always tell my folks here is we do what we do because it's right, not because it's easy or popular. And sometimes that makes us kind of outliers in the community, but at the same time, we're able to look ourselves in the mirror at the end of the day.
And Jonathan, if you were a new police officer, having been one and having been a prosecutor for many years, what kind of advice would you give to a new individual starting off in the field of either police work or prosecutor's field, or doing both like you did?
When I talk to new folks in the office or new folks when I was on patrol, I would tell them the same thing. Everyone deserves to be treated the same, and everyone has a bad day. No one ever wakes up in the day and says, "Hey, today's a good day. Let's go see the police or let's go see the prosecutor." They're here, they're having contact with us because something has gone wrong. So we need to remember that when we're talking to them. And again, we do what we do because it's right, not because it's easy or popular. I realize that good people make bad mistakes, but there are truly some bad people out there. So we want to make sure that the right people are in the right places. Not everyone deserves to go to prison. Not everyone needs to go to prison. But for those that need to go to prison, we're going to make sure that they go there. We're going to try to make sure that they go there. And for those that we can help with treatment or something, we're going to try to do that as well. So, it's one of those that we don't become personally wed to a case, because if we do that, that's going to lead to burnout. And if we take a professional and objective view to everything that we do and every interaction that we have, we're going to be able to treat that case differently. And so that's my biggest thing to law enforcement and to prosecutors. We see a higher level of PTSD in police and prosecutors. We see a higher level of substance abuse. We see a higher level of divorce. And so I want to make sure that they're getting the health care that they need and the self care that they need to deal with this and hopefully have a long and successful career.
Excellent advice. And if you were a politician, I'm sure you know some. What kind of advice would you give for the people there in Lewis County and at the state level there in Olympia, Washington, to make things better for you and the people you work with in the criminal justice field?
So one of the opportunities that this job has afforded me is I get to talk to new prosecutors as they get elected or appointed to their office. And one of the things I always tell them is that every day you have to be willing to make a decision that will cost you your job. And if you're not willing to do that, this isn't the job for you. If you want to be popular, this isn't the job for you. Every day we make decisions that by definition is going to make someone mad. If we charge a case, the defendant's family's mad. If we don't charge a case, the victim and the community's mad. So by definition and just by process, we're going to make someone unhappy. And we have to realize that and we have to be okay with that. But at the same time, we have to be willing to confront that. So if someone shows up in my office that says, you're a piece of crap because you didn't do X, Y, and Z, I have to be willing to sit down and have a conversation with that person and say, you're right. I didn't do what you wanted me to do. Here's why. And you have to be able to have those honest conversations. If you're not willing to do that, this really isn't the job for you. You have to know that you're a single decision away from being unemployed. And what I tell my folks and a lot of people in life is every day's a job interview, so always put your best foot forward, and you're going to make a lot of decisions. You have to be willing to own them.
Excellent, excellent. And so I know you've probably had a lot of highs, a lot of lows. What would you say, Jonathan, are some of your biggest hurdles, some of your biggest challenges in your work?
It kind of changing landscape of what we do. When you had the drug laws that were overturned, that first day we let 36 people out of jail. And, since then we've entered orders on thousands of people to get their convictions overturned. And it's one of those that we don't take it personally. It's a decision the court made. We're officers of the court. We're going to abide by those. And as a citizen, I'm not happy about it, but as a prosecutor, I have a job to do, and so we're just going to do it. And so I think if we can continue to have that kind of disconnect, that personal disconnect, it makes it a lot easier. But I'm proud of the team that we've built here. I'm proud of the people that I get to work with every day, and I feel honored that the people of Lewis County let me do it. Every time someone thanks me for for my service, I always say thank you for letting me do it, because they've given me the opportunity to make some differences, I think, in the community, to provide for my family, and I feel very fortunate. As far as cases that I've tried, I think one of the proudest moments of my career is there was a homicide in 1985. I remember hearing about this case when I was in high school, and for a long time it went unsolved. And we were able to make an arrest. We ended up in a 6-week jury trial. And in 2013, we were able to obtain a conviction to where the defendant was sentenced to 105 years for the murder of an elderly couple here in Lewis County. And to this day, I'll see some of the law enforcement officers that were involved in that, and they're almost in tears just thanking us for the work that we did. And, again, I'm thanking them for the fact that they were there when we had to try the case all those years later. So it's nice when you can bring closure to the families and when you can bring some type of security to community. I always tell folks that, hey, the best advertisement for my office is you don't even know that we're there. We just do our job. It's going to be done well, and you don't have to worry about the product that's coming out of there. And so that makes job security for all of us. And so, I truly, there are days where I wonder why I do what I do, but for most of the time, I'm truly honored to be the prosecutor for Lewis County and honored to work with the folks that I get to work with.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a great job down there, Jonathan. Appreciate you going on the show today. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No, just thanks for having me on. Thanks for doing what you do. And, I encourage anybody that's interested in doing this to pursue it. It's a great career. And, it's one of those, you get to see things. We see things on a daily basis that most people don't even want to admit occurs in a community. But at the same time, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. So if anyone's interested in law enforcement or becoming a prosecutor, feel free to give me a call, give me a holler. Any questions, I'm always here.
All right, then I really appreciate you coming on the show once again, and good luck. Maybe we see each other cross paths here in the near future.
All right, sounds good.
All right, if you're ever out here in Hawaii, man, look me up. All right,
have a
take
good
care.
one.
All right, aloha.
Take your time.